Whispers in the Void, Part 2, Chapter 9, Burnout Run. The Widow was never meant to sprint. She was built for slow, deliberate pushes, steady burns, cautious maneuvers, patient mining runs where failure meant a quiet death and nobody noticed for months. Now her reactor screamed under a full-throttle burn Arg hadn't dared attempt in years. Warning lights flashed across every console. Heat levels rising past safety margins. Pressure in the coolant loop redlining. The ship's old metal bones shuddered with every second of thrust. Arg gritted his teeth and kept the throttle wide open. Ceres lay ahead on the trajectory map, a pale dot floating against the void. Still 2.5 days out, even at maximum burn. Behind them, Arg didn't want to check again. The Widow's long-range sensors were fried, blinded by interference that scrambled every waveform, but he could feel it. A weight pushing at the edges of perception, like static in the back of his brain. Whatever was in the dead zone, whatever was moving, it wasn't done with them. Rayna hadn't strapped in at first. When the G-forces hit, she got thrown hard against the console bulkhead before Arg could yell at her to secure. Now she sat slumped in the co-pilot's chair, breathing fast, her face pale and slick with sweat. Her hands gripped the armrest like she was holding onto the edge of a cliff. Arg spared a quick glance her way. "You holding together?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on something just beyond the viewport glass, something only she could see. Arg followed her gaze. Nothing there. Just black space. Still. Rayna's lips moved soundlessly, like she was talking to herself or someone else. Arg keyed the internal mic, pitching into her suit's comm channel. "Rayna, snap out of it!" Her head jerked like she'd been slapped, her pupils dilated wide. "I saw them," she whispered. Arg's stomach twisted. "Saw what?" She pressed her shaking hands to her temples. "The crew, the Rents crew. They're out there." Her breath hitched. "I heard them calling me." Arg cursed under his breath and yanked the comm speaker volume down. "You're hypoxic, stress, and oxygen that'll scramble your brain." "No," she snapped back, her voice breaking but fierce. "I know what hypoxia feels like. This is different." She pointed toward the sensor display, where lines of data scrolled like gibberish. "It's in the static." Arg's hands hovered over the console. For a second, just one breathless second, he almost believed her. Almost. Then the Widow's external hull rang like someone had struck it with a hammer. Both of them froze. Another impact, this time further aft. Something scraping along the portside planking. Not rocks. They were out of the debris fields. Not micrometeoroids. Wrong frequency. Wrong resonance. Arg killed the external running lights, dropped power from non-essential systems. The ship's interior dimmed to emergency levels. Just the red glow of status LEDs and the low hum of overworked engines. "Hold tight," he said, fingers moving fast over the manual nav controls. "We're burning harder." Rayna swallowed, pulling her harness tight. The Widow surged forward again, main thrusters howling. The deck vibrated under their feet like a living thing, fighting, screaming, refusing to die. Behind them, the proximity alarms blared and fell silent, burned out or simply giving up. For the first time since leaving Earth, Arg felt something close to fear settle deep in his gut. This wasn't just bad luck. This wasn't just a failing ship, a broken woman, and a dead survey crew. Something bigger was moving out there in the dark, and it was following them. Chapter 10, Critical Mass. The Widow's reactor died at 0417 ship time. 1 minute, Arg was watching the coolant levels climb past critical, hands flying across the console as he rerouted what little reserve power he had left to the thrust capacitors. The next, total blackout. The hum of the engines cut off mid-cycle, leaving behind a silence so sudden and absolute it felt like the ship itself had stopped breathing. Every light flickered, dimmed, then died. Arg's emergency systems kicked back in 4 seconds later. Battery backup snapping online with barely enough juice to keep life support and minimal lighting alive. Gravity faded. The cockpit went cold. Arg floated forward in his seat, weightless, momentum pushing him halfway across the control deck before he grabbed a handhold to steady himself. Behind him, Rayna gasped, a sharp intake of breath in the sudden dark. "Reactor's gone," Arg said flatly, voice tight in his throat. "Scrammed hard. Full shutdown." "No restart?" she asked, eyes wide in the dim red emergency light. Arg shook his head, already knowing the answer. "Best case, we'd need 12 hours just to cool the core enough to run a manual reset. Worst case?" He trailed off. There wasn't enough time for the worst case. Rayna stared at the life support panel. "O2 reserves?" Arg checked. 32 hours at current consumption, she said grimly. "Less if we get any more leaks." Her knuckles whitened against the armrest. "And Ceres?" "Still 2 days out at drift speed." Her stomach twisted at the math. They weren't going to make it. Not like this. For a while, neither of them spoke. The widow drifted, cold and slow, coasting on dead momentum. Arg pulled himself through the narrow service corridor to the engineering section, checked the reactor shielding, ran every manual diagnostic he could with what little power the batteries had left. Dead. The main drive coils were shot, probably from running full burn way past safety margins. He climbed back to the cockpit, sweat chilling fast on his skin. Rayna was curled in the corner now, holding her knees to her chest. "Okay," he said, planting himself up by the console. "Here's the reality. We've got limited battery power, limited air, and zero thrust." She didn't reply. "So," he continued, voice rough, "we either sit here to wait to suffocate, or we think real hard and get creative." Rayna let out a short, bitter laugh. "Creative. Right." Arg grabbed a roll of duct tape from the tool bin and started wrapping an emergency heater cable tighter against the battery conduits, trying to squeeze every last watt out of the reserves. That's when the first knock came. Both of them froze. A single solid impact against the outer airlock hatch. Arg slowly turned towards the door. The sound vibrated through the bulkhead like someone tapped metal with a wrench. Rayna's voice went thin. "Did something just hit us?" Another knock, louder this time. 3 sharp, deliberate raps. Arg floated towards the internal airlock console and checked the external sensors. Still blind. No atmospheric differential outside, no pressure signatures, nothing. His throat felt tight, like all the air in the cabin had suddenly thinned. "Could be thermal expansion," he said too fast. "Hull cooling, metal flexing." But even as he said it, the lie tasted stale. The knocking came again, faster now, urgent. Then, a voice. Not over the comms, not in his headset, just through the hull. Muffled but clear enough to twist every nerve in his spine. "Arg, open the door." His blood ran cold. The voice was female. Soft. Familiar. His heart stopped. Tara. Rayna scrambled backwards across the deck. Her eyes went wild. "What the hell is that?" Arg's pulse hammered in his throat. For a single breath, he reached towards the airlock controls. Halfway there, fingers trembling. Then he stopped. Yanked his hand back like the panel had turned red hot. "No," he whispered, more to himself than to her. The voice came again, closer this time. "Arg, let me in." Behind him, the backup battery status light dropped another bar. Oxygen reserves, 29 hours and falling. Ceres, still 2 days away. And something, or some things, still outside. Waiting. Knocking. Chapter 11. The Cold Between. Arg ripped open the access panel beneath the cockpit floor, tools scattering in the low gravity, cursing under his breath with every turn of the wrench. The Widow's exterior mining thrusters weren't designed for ship propulsion, just short, high-output burns used to maneuver around asteroids during close drilling ops. They burned hot, dirty, and unstable. The fuel mix was corrosive. The feed lines were cracked in 3 places. But they were the only engines left with any juice in them. Rayna crouched near the comm panel, staring at the airlock readout, like it might change if she just looked hard enough. The knocking had stopped. For now. But that didn't make it better. That just made it quieter. Arg's hands worked fast and rough, fingers numb from cold and adrenaline. Fuel lines ruptured in 2 spots, he said, teeth clenched. I'm going to bypass the secondaries, route direct feed to the starboard maneuvering jets, give us maybe a few meters per second, Delta V. Rayna turned toward him, her eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep or crying, maybe both. That's not enough to reach Ceres. Nope, Arg said. Then why? Because a drift with no burn is a death sentence. He snapped, slamming the panel shut. With thrust, even bad thrust, we can correct course. Put out a tighter distress beacon, or at least buy a few more hours of air. Rayna pulled her knees up, curling into herself. You ever done anything this stupid before? Every day for 9 years. He climbed back into the pilot seat, fingers hovering over the manual thruster controls. Last chance to back out. But backing out had never been part of Arg Arston's vocabulary. Kill all non-essential systems, he ordered. Rayna reached for the breaker panel and flipped 4 switches in quick succession. The cabin lights dimmed further, going from red to a sickly, flickering amber. Life support dropped to a bare minimum. Internal gravity failed completely. They both floated now, drifting slow and awkward. Arg took one slow breath, held it. Firing in 3, 2, 1. He slammed the ignition switch. The Widow lurched. Hard. The mining thrusters roared to life beneath the ship like a dragon coughing fire through cracked lungs. The whole cabin shuddered, bulkheads rattling, loose tools bouncing off the wall. Somewhere aft, something metal tore loose with a horrible screech. For a second, Arg thought the entire starboard panel might be sheared off completely. But the ship held. Velocity readout, +5 meters a second, then +7, then +9. Not much, but something. They were moving. Course drifted 3 degrees off true, but still Ceres bound, if just barely. Arg cut the thrusters before the lines could rupture completely. The sudden silence that followed almost felt worse than the noise. Oxygen, 26 hours. Battery reserves, dwindling. Reactor, cold. But they'd bought time. A little. Arg sat back in the pilot's chair, eyes closed, chest heaving from the strain. Across the deck, Rayna laid out something between a laugh and a sob. Hell of a burn, Arston, she said, voice shaky. Don't thank me yet, he muttered. Then before either of them could say another word, the proximity alarm tripped again. Low frequency. Close range. Arg's eyes snapped open. Rayna turned towards the sensor panel. It's moving with us, she whispered. Arg checked the scope manually, rerouting every bit of remaining power to the passive scanner array. No hard contact, no visible object. Just mass displacement. Something big. Shadowing their trajectory, keeping pace, matching speed. Arg's stomach sank. They weren't outrunning this. Not at this velocity. Not in this ship. Rayna's voice came soft, barely above the whisper. What if we're not supposed to outrun it? Arg didn't answer, because deep down, somewhere past logic, a small part of him was starting to believe the same thing. Chapter 12. Ghost Signal. The signal came in soft at first, a faint, broken pulse buried beneath layers of static, just low enough to miss if you weren't listening for it. Rayna caught it while running a background diagnostic on the comms relay, more out of habit than hope. The battered array had been barely functional since the burn, and every frequency scan up until now had returned nothing but white noise and background radiation. But this was different. She leaned closer to the console, adjusting the gain, narrowing the bandwidth, filtering. The static parted just enough for her to hear it. A voice, faint, garbled, looping in fragments. "And please, anyone out here?" Rayna's throat tightened. "Arg?" No answer. "Arg!" He appeared in the cockpit doorway seconds later, wiping grease off his hands from yet another fruitless reactor restart attempt. "What now?" "Signal. Weak, but real." She stepped aside so he could see the screen. Arg's eyes narrowed. She played it again. The voice cracked through the speakers like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Repeat. Ceres Control. Grid. Delta 34. Distress. Please, respond." Arg's blood ran cold. "Ceres Control," he muttered. But it didn't make sense. That signal was old. He pulled up the timestamp embedded in the carrier wave. Date of origin? 2 days ago. Impossible. They've run continuous scans since leaving the dead zone. Nothing. Now suddenly, a clean echo of a distress call floating in behind them like a ghost. "Can you lock source?" he asked. Rayna's fingers flew across the keys. "Trying." Triangulation was roughly within their sensor grid offline. But half of a minute of patchwork calculations, the results blinked on a screen. Source vector, astern. Relative drift velocity is 0. Arg's heart sank. "Behind us?" he asked quietly. "Yeah." "Distance?" Rayna hesitated, swallowed. 70 meters. Arg's eyes widened. "That's impossible," he said, standing up fast enough to knock off the console. There was nothing back there. No ship, no beacon, no active transponder. But the signal kept repeating, growing stronger with every cycle. "Please respond. Please respond." Arg grabbed the external cam controls, swinging what little field of vision the aft cameras could provide. Just static. Sensor wash. Blackness. But for one flickering frame, a shape. Oblong. Unlit. Drifting at speed, matched with the widow's dead drift. The image cut out before Arg could focus on it. Rayna's breathing went shallow. "We're being shadowed." "No," Arg said softly, denying it out loud even though the truth already settled deep in his gut. It had been following them since the burn. Maybe before. The knocking, the interference, the hallucinations. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't space degree. Something was with them. Rayna pulled her knees up to her chest again, rocking slowly in her seat like she was trying to steady herself. Arg didn't have that luxury. He locked the external comms loop open and sent out a repeating pulse on every standard rescue frequency. "Unidentified contact. This is independent minor vessel Dust Widow. State your identity and intent." Static answered back. He tried again. Nothing. And still, the ghost signal looped. "Ceres Control. Delta 34. Please respond." Over and over, like a broken voice box on an infinite replay. Or worse, like bait. Arg stared at the blackness beyond the viewport glass, feeling the cold creep deeper into the ship. Arg, for the first time since Tara's death, since his first day alone in the belt, he realized that something chilled him far more than the dead reactor and the thin air reserves. This wasn't going to end clean. Not this time. Chapter 13. Hard Vacuum. Arg stood in front of the suit locker, staring at the old EVA rig like it might bite him. The seals were worn, the joints stiff. The last time he used it was 6 months back. Just a routine antenna replacement, nothing like this. Now, he wasn't sure if it'd hold under prolonged exposure, but he didn't have a choice. Whatever was drifting behind them, it was 70 meters off the Widow's aft, holding perfect speed match, not closing, not falling back, just pacing them. And the ghost signal still looped, endless, broken, like a lure. Arg keyed the suit's internal diagnostic, watching the green lights flickering to life. Oxygen reserves just over 2 hours. Suit battery at 60%. Helmet comms shaky but functional. Close enough. Rayna floated nearby, hugging herself tight near the cockpit hatch, her knees drawn up like she might fold herself smaller to escape the pressure of the ship's thin air. "You're really doing this?" she said, her voice hollow. Arg checked his seals. "You got a better idea?" Her eyes stayed distant. "I'd tell you not to go, but I don't think that's going to stop you." "Nope." He reached over, grabbed a handheld beacon strobe from the wall kit, clipped it to his belt. "Keep the lock sealed. If I'm not back in 40 minutes, you start cycling the emergency beacon on loop. Push it hard enough that even station trash haulers pick it up." Rayna nodded, but said nothing more. Arg cycled the airlock. Vacuum hit like a slap. Total silence. Just the faint sound of his own breath inside the helmet. The Widow hung beneath him like a dark wounded animal, hull scarred and cracked from the overburn. Radiation panels scorched along the port side winglets. Beyond her, empty space. And somewhere in that space, the contact. Arg pushed off the hull, firing a single burst from his side thrusters, controlled steady. His visor display flickered with static as he drifted clear of the Widow's shadow. Sensor readings stayed messy, half-blind, unreliable. But at 15 meters distance, he caught the first real look at it. A shape, long, angular. Dark metal pitted like it had been drifting for decades. No lights, no visible engine ports. Just wrong. Wrong proportions. Wrong alignment. It didn't look like any human-built craft he'd ever seen. No registration markers, no antenna array, no external hatches, just this black, oblong mess, silent and still. Arg slowed his drift, heart pounding. 20 meters out now. His helmet comm crackled, too loud, sudden, almost making him flinch. Rayna's voice burst through the sharp and panicked. "Arg, don't!" And then silence. Dead channel. His HUD went dark. Suit power, offline. Environmental control, offline. Helmet lights, flickering. The stars disappeared. The universe folded inward. Arg's breath hitched in his throat as blackness closed in around him. Not space, not vacuum, but something deeper. Something aware. Something cold. Something watching. He opened his mouth to shout, to call her name, to scream. He didn't know which, but no sound came. Just the crushing silence of hard vacuum. And the last thing he felt was something reaching for him. Chapter 14. Contact. Arg woke, gasping for air. For a few breathless seconds, he thought he was back on the Widow, back inside the cramped cockpit, the cold metal walls pressing in on him. But then the details started to surface, slow, disjointed, wrong. No suit, no helmet, no bulkheads, just dim light, like twilight under dirty water. A floor that felt too soft beneath him, like standing on padded insulation that gave just a little under his weight. He looked up. No ceiling, just darkness. A shifting, formless black that seemed to pulse like breath. Arg's heart pounded in his chest. He turned in place, spinning too fast, dizzy from the lack of orientation. Somewhere behind him, footsteps. Soft, dragging across the unseen floor. He turned. There she stood. Tara. Wearing the same gray System Tech jumpsuit she'd worn on her last day at the hospital, hair loose around her shoulders, skin pale, eyes darker than they should be. She smiled at him, soft, sad, too knowing. Arg stumbled backward. "No," he whispered. Her voice was soft, the same tone he'd used when walking him after a late salvage run, back when life was smaller, simpler. "You shouldn't have come out here," she said. His throat worked, but no words came. Behind her, shadows moved, human shapes, blurred and flickering, like memories being played through dirty glass. Faces from the Wren's missing crew. Familiar figures from his years in the belt, other miters long gone. Some dead, some just lost, all standing just behind her, half there, half not. Arg squeezed his eyes shut. Wake up. When he opened them, Tara was closer. Her face changed, just a flicker, but enough. For a split second, her features shifted. Her eyes went empty, her mouth too wide, teeth wrong, not human. Arg staggered back, breath hitching. His heartbeat pounded so hard he felt it in his fingertips. "This isn't real," he hissed. Her smile faded, and the shadows moved closer. Suddenly, pressure. The world lurched sideways. The cold slammed back into his lungs like a hammer. Oxygen rushed in, too fast, burning. Gravity returned with a sickening jolt. Arg's back hit cold metal. He was in the Widow's airlock. Helmet gone, suit seals cracked, alarm screaming in his ears. His body spasmed as he coughed violently, dragging in harsh, metallic-tasting airs. Rayna's voice broke through, sharp and panicked. "Arg! Arg, can you hear me?" He blinked hard, vision swimming. Her face hovering above him, blurred at the edges, but real. Real. Her hands pressed against his chest, shaking him. "You weren't breathing," she shouted. "I pulled you back in. Jesus, Arg, what the hell happened out there?" He opened his mouth to answer, stopped, because behind her, just for a second, he thought he saw something standing at the far end of the corridor. Tall, thin, motionless, watching. By the time he blinked again, it was gone. Arg closed his eyes, heart still thundering, lungs raw. Somewhere deep in the ship, another system alarm began to chirp. A new fault, but this time it wasn't reactors or oxygen or comms. It was life support. Not a failure. Intrusion warning. Internal atmosphere breach. Arg's eyes snapped open. Rayna followed his gaze towards the console. The readout flashed again. Source, cargo bay. Location, inside. Chapter 15. The breach. Arg didn't wait for the second alarm cycle. He was already moving, yanking open the weapons locker beneath the engineering console. Not much to work with. An old bolt gun used for hull patching, a short-barreled flare launcher, and two battered utility blades dulled from years of cutting rig cabling. He grabbed the bolt gun and tossed the flare launcher to Rayna. "Stay behind me," he said. Rayna's hands shook as she loaded a magnesium flare cartridge, snapping the chamber closed with more force than necessary. Her face was pale, but set, her jaws clenched tight. Arg checked the charge on the bolt gun, 30 spikes in the cylinder. each one capable of punching clean through 6 centimeters of alloy plate at close range. Not designed for combat, but it'd hurt anything that didn't bleed. Or whatever they were dealing with now. The corridor leading towards the cargo bay felt smaller than usual, tighter. Every flicker of the emergency lights sent shadows crawling across the bulkheads. Every step echoed like they were moving through a hollow drum. The breach alarm kept pulsing at a slow, steady interval, monotonous and relentless. Internal atmosphere compromise, cargo bay level, source, unregistered mass displacement. Arg reached the hatch first, pressed his back to the wall beside it. He keyed the manual override, setting the door to partial open, just wide enough to see through. The air inside the bay hung heavy, denser than it shouldn't have been, like pressure building before a storm. Condensation dripped down the far wall, pulling at the deck like sweat on cold metal. Arg pierced through the gap. At first, nothing. Just crates, tool bins, the EVA winch arm, then movement. Something slow. A shape emerged from behind the stacked cargo. Tall, lurching. Human, but wrong. Arms too long, head tilted at an unnatural angle, limbs bending where they shouldn't. For a single frozen second, Arg's brain refused to process what he was seeing. Then it moved again, faster this time, crossing the space between them with impossible speed. Arg shoved the hatch control, sealing the door just as the thing slammed into it with bone-jarring force. The whole bulkhead shook. Rayna screamed, stumbling back. Arg raised the bolt gun, aiming center mass at the door. Through the steel between them was too thick for a clean shot. Another impact. Then another. The door dented inward, metal groaning under the strain. Arg's mind raced. The door wouldn't hold long. Not against that. Not here. Go, he barked at Rayna, grabbing her shoulder. Back to the cockpit. Seal the blast shutters. Now! But move! She didn't argue. Together they ran, boots scraping across the deck as the Widow's interior shook again. Each impact from the thing in the cargo bay making the hull feel thinner, more fragile. By the time they reached the cockpit, Arg was already locking down secondary bulkheads, triggering every mechanical barrier the ship still had power for. Somewhere below them, metal screeched, a tearing, shearing sound. Rayna stared at him, pale and trembling. It's inside the ship, she whispered. Arg gritted his teeth. Yeah, he said, chambering the next round into the bolt gun. I noticed. Chapter 16. Hull Integrity. The first hull breach registered at 0613 ship time. Arg didn't need the console to tell him where. The whole deck trembled under his boots as the Widow's venting alarm screamed across every compartment. Hull fracture detected. Cargo bay, Sector B. Internal pressure loss imminent. Seal it, Rayna shouted from behind the pilot's chair, clutching the flare launcher like it was a life preserver. I'm trying, Arg growled, his hands flying over the console. Secondary bulkheads slammed shut across the lower decks, locking off the cargo bay and two adjacent maintenance corridors. Arg rerouted what little power they had left to internal integrity fields. Weak, but better than nothing. For a second, everything held. Then the sound started. Not a metal on metal this time. Something worse. A low, pulsing vibration coming up through the ship's frame, like the hull itself was being pulled, twisted. Arg's stomach dropped as the Widow's structural integrity readout began to fall. 2%, 4, 7, too fast. Rayna clamped her hand over her ears. What the hell is that? Arg didn't answer. He already knew. The thing wasn't trying to break through the doors anymore. It was tearing through the walls. The Widow groaned like a dying animal, deck plating starting to buckle just aft of the living quarters. One pressure sensor after another went red. Compartmental breach, Section 4A, Section 4B, Section 5. Arg stabbed the emergency override, prepping the one thing he swore he'd never use, the full vent deck protocol. A blunt force solution. Venting the compromised decks into space would decompress half the ship, but it might be enough to force the thing out, or at least slow it down, if it didn't kill them first. "Rayna," he barked. "Get to the forward lockout seat. Strap in. Tight." Her eyes widened. "You're venting the decks? That'll take out the life support grid." "I know." Her lips moved like she wanted to argue, but her survival instincts won out. She scrambled for the lockout seat near the sensor pod and cinched herself down, hands shaking. Arg braced himself against the console, heart pounding. One deep breath, no second chances. He keyed the command. "Emergency atmosphere purge, sections 3 through 6. Confirm?" Arg slammed his palm against the console. A split-second delay. Then the sound of rushing air, like this ship exhaling her last breath. The external vents blew wide, tearing atmosphere, loose gear, and unsecured debris out into space. The lights flickered, then held. The entire rear half of the Widow fell dark and cold. A graveyard. For a few long seconds, Arg's ears rang with the sudden silence. No more alarms, no more breaches. Just the faint hiss of depressurized corridors and the Widow drifting quieter than she had in years. Arg sat frozen, chest heaving, sweat chilling fast on his skin. Rayna unbuckled slowly, staring at him like she wasn't sure if she should thank him or slap him. "Did it work?" she asked, voice hoarse. Arg checked the internal sensors. No movement, no mass displacement, no more warnings. He sank back against the console, letting out a long, shaky breath. "I think so," he said. But even as he said it, something deep inside told him it wasn't over. Not yet. In the back of his mind, Tara's voice whispered again, soft, too close. "You can't run from this, Arg. Not out here." Chapter 17. Signal Lock. The Widow's remaining sensor array woke with a flicker of life at 0702 ship time. Arg nearly missed it, half asleep at the console, exhaustion dragging at him like lead. The deck still smelled like burned insulation and ozone from the vent protocol, the air thin and metallic. But when the proximity alert chirped, soft, weak, but there, he snapped upright. Rayna stirred from her curled spot near the sensor station, blinking hard. Her skin was pale, lips cracked from dehydration, but her voice still worked. "What now?" she croaked. Arg leaned in, fingers moving across the battered controls, coaxing every ounce of function out of the half-dead ship. At first he thought it was another false positive. Then the signature stabilized. Long-range transponder lock, Ceres Research and Recovery Vessel, SRV Bellwether, bearing plus 0.12 degrees. Relative drift correction in progress. ETA intercept, 9 hours. Arg stared at the screen, daring to believe it. "Rescue," he said, voice hoarse. Rayna blinked. "Wait, seriously? They're coming?" "It's real," he confirmed, double-checking the signal's encryption tag. Celestia Control Authenticators. No spoof, no goose frequency. Not this time. For the first time in days, hope cracked through the pressure in his chest. He slammed the outboard comm channel and sent an emergency acknowledgement ping, repeating it on every available frequency. "Dust Widow to Bellwether. Mayday in progress. Primary reactor down. 2 souls on board. Oxygen critical. Request immediate retrieval vector." The transmission stuttered, but held. The Bellwether answered 5 minutes later. Short, clipped, professional. "We read you, Widow. Tracking your beacon. Hold course. Stay sealed. We're coming." Arg slumped back into the chair, exhaling hard. For one breathless moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to make it. But the Widow wasn't done reminding them where they were. At 07:16, the secondary sensors picked up something else, trailing them. Still. Arg pulled up the contact data. Another mass displacement. Smaller now. Weaker. But still moving. Keeping pace. A blind spot between them and the Bellwether's approach vector. Rayna spotted the second contact line the same moment he did. "Another ship?" she asked, her voice brittle. Arg's stomach twisted. "No transponder, no active emissions, just mass and movement." He zoomed the scope. Still no visual confirmation. Just a thin, irregular signature, almost like a debris cloud. But moving, with purpose. Rayna grabbed the edge of the console. "It's not gone." Arg shook his head slowly. "No," he said, swallowing hard. "It's not." The Widow's hull creaked, just enough to make them both flinch. Arg kicked up the comms again. "Bellwether, be advised. We have an unidentified object shadowing us. Low profile, 0 ID. May be related to the recent shipboard breach." No reply. He tried again. Still nothing. The rescue ship's signal, clear just minutes before, had gone thin, like something was interfering again. A wall of static rising between them and their last hope. Rayna's voice came soft. "Arg, what if we're not the only thing they're tracking?" Arg's throat worked as he watched the Widow's failing sensor suite blur the screen with more interference. For one long second, all he could do was stare at the dark and wonder how much worse this was going to get. Chapter 18. Closing Distance. The Bellwether was 9 hours out, but Arg knew they didn't have 9 hours. The Widow's oxygen reserve ticked lower by the minute. What little heat remained in the ship's core was bleeding out fast, condensation freezing on the interior bulkheads. And now, the trailing contact. Still pacing them, still closing. Arg worked fast, rerouting power from emergency lighting and non-essential life support into the main transmitter array. It wasn't much, but it might be enough for one strong burst. Rayna sat beside him, holding her cracked tablet screen, trying to monitor what was left of their sensor returns. Every couple of minutes, she'd glance toward the airlock hatch, like she half expected it to start rattling again. Arg keyed the manual override on the transmitter. "This is independent mining vessel, Dust Widow," he began, voice steady despite the dryness in his throat. "To approaching SRV Bellwether. Be advised, we are under possible pursuit by unknown contact. Request immediate vector lock and retrieval priority. Repeat, unknown contact trailing our course. Proximity less than 1 click. No comms, no ID." He paused, then added, "This isn't a drill." He fired the transmission. A full spectrum pulsed. Burned half the Widow's remaining battery reserves in the process. The console dimmed. Half the cockpit lights flickered out. For several long seconds, nothing. Rayna's breathing sounded too loud in the dead air. Then static cleared. The Bellwether's voice came back, broken, but there. "Dust Widow, receiving priority lock, adjusting approach, hold position, confirm mass signature of pursuing contact." Arg's fingers shook as he typed the reply, but before he could send it, a flash alert pinged on the display. The trailing object, up until now maintaining a near constant speed match, had just accelerated. Fast. Too fast. Closing the distance. Rayna's eyes widened. "Arg?" He was already moving. "Suit up," he ordered, reaching for the emergency helmet stored near the cockpit hatch. "We'll lose hull integrity again. You'll need it." She didn't argue. Across the board, the Widow's proximity sensors lit up like a warning beacon. 100 meters. 70. 40. Rayna strapped herself in, hands white-knuckled on the restraints. Arg keyed the internal comms, flipped through the views, and then, one brief, breathless second, the aft exterior camera caught it. A shape moving fast through the voids. No light, no drive signature, no identifiable structure. Just dark limbs, angular, like fractured machinery stretched too thin, and moving in a way that didn't make sense, like it wasn't bound by the inertia that ruled everything else out here. Arg stared. His gut clenched hard. It wasn't a ship, wasn't a drone, wasn't human. Rayna saw the same feed. She covered her mouth, her breath hitching with a dry sob. What the hell is that? Arg swallowed hard. No answer came. The Widow shook violently as something impacted against the lower hull. Lights surged and died. The reactor, a dead cold mass behind them, stayed dark. R's ears rang from the sudden change of pressure. Somewhere down in the maintenance corridors, metal screamed. Another impact. Then another. The thing wasn't just following anymore. It was boarding, trying to get inside. Arg locked eyes with Rayna. We're out of time. He grabbed the flare launcher from the floor. Stay behind me. Somewhere in the void ahead, the bellwether's thrusters burned brighter, closing fast. But behind them, the dark was coming. Chapter 19. Forced Entry. The first breach opened near the aft service corridor, a deep, grinding sound, followed by the unmistakable hiss of atmosphere venting into hard vacuum. Art didn't need the pressure monitors to tell him it was bad. The deck beneath his feet buckled with metallic groaning. Then, bang! The maintenance hatch blew inward. A rush of debris scattered through the narrow hull, broken conduit lines, tool racks, shards of composite paneling. Rayna screamed. Art caught her in the harness straps at her shoulders and dragged her behind the forward bulkhead just as something long, black, and jointed snaked through the open gap. It wasn't a claw, not really. Not metal, not flesh. Somewhere in between. Like machined components that had changed their mind halfway through construction. The thing scraped along the walls, moving with jerky, unnatural spasms, twitching against the exposed wiring like it was testing the air. Arg leveled the flare launcher. Cover your eyes, he barked. Rayna turned her head just as Arg fired. The magnesium flare burst like a miniature star, filling the corridor with searing white light and enough heat to flash fry exposed skin. The thing recoiled. For one impossible second, Arg thought it was retreating. But it didn't. It just paused, almost confused, then started pushing forward again. Slower now, but still coming. The emergency doors tried to close, automatic safety protocols kicking in even with failing power, but the thing jammed the tracks. The steel bulkhead twisted and folded like tinfoil. Another limb followed the first, then another, each one segmented, twitching, too many joints bending the wrong way. Arg grabbed Rayna's arms. Forward compartment, go! They sprinted down the last stretch of hull, boots scraping over the frost-rimmed deck plates. Behind them, metal tore open like wet paper. The pressure differential hit next. Not a full decompression, just enough to slam Arg to the far wall, knocking the breath from his lungs. Rayna tumbled after him, crashing hard into a storage crate. Arg forced himself upright, dragged her to her feet. Cockpit, he shouted over the rising wind. Final lockout! They stumbled through the last safety hatch, slamming it shut behind them. This one was reinforced. The blast shutter. The last line of defense before vacuum took everything. Arg jammed the manual lock in place. The noise outside dulled, muffled by layers of steel and polymer. But it didn't stop. Scraping. Pounding. The entire door trembled with each impact. Rayna collapsed into the pilot's chair, shaking uncontrollably. Arg grabbed the last 2 oxygen masks from the emergency rack and shoved one towards her. "Short bursts," he ordered. "Make it last." She nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks, too shocked to argue. Arg checked the external proximity scanner. The bellwether was closer now. 6 hours out. Too long. Way too long. His eyes flickered back to the pressure readout on the door seal, dropping, minute by minute. "We're not going to hold this long, are we?" Rayna asked, her voice cracked and small. Arg didn't lie. "Nope." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Just the sound of their breath, the rattle of the bulkheads, and something on the other side, still pounding, still coming. Chapter 20. No Way Out. Arg sat hunched over the consoles, staring at the dwindling pressure readouts like he could will them to stabilize. They didn't. The interior hull temperature had dropped 5 more degrees in the last 30 minutes. Ice was forming along the cockpit viewport. Condensation froze on the inside of Rayna's mask with each shaky exhale. The Widow was dying. Fast. The thing outside the blast doors wasn't stopping. Every impact rattled through the deck plating, each hit harder than the last. The door's pressure shield was already giving, microscopic fractures spreading like spiderwebs along the upper weld seam. Rayna pulled her knees up to her chest, rocking slightly, whispering to herself between shallow pulls from the oxygen mask. Arg ran the math again. Oxygen, 4 hours at most. Hull integrity, maybe less. Bellwether ETA, still 5 hours out. The Widow wasn't going to make it. Neither were they, unless they did something desperate. Arg's eyes drifted to the emergency hull breach protocol, locked behind a manual override he'd never thought he'd touch outside of catastrophic decompression. It was simple, really. Explosive bolts along the forward coupling, designed to eject the cockpit module as a last-ditch evacuation measure. Unshielded, unpowered. Just a metal canister with enough structural integrity to keep them alive for maybe 20 minutes. Maybe less. Enough time for a fast pickup if someone knew exactly where to look. Rayna noticed the way his eyes lingered on the control. Her voice cracked. "You're thinking about venting us." Arg didn't answer right away. "I'm thinking about options," he said finally. "That's not an option." "It's the only one left." Her hand shook as she pulled the mask away from her face. "If Bellwether doesn't get a lock on us, then we die fast instead of slow." His voice was low, flat. "Better than getting torn apart by that thing." Silence stretched between them. Another impact rocked the door. This time, the inner frame bent inward. A thin, cold draft pushed through the crack now forming at the top seam. Rayna's breath hitched. "I don't want to die out here," she whispered. "Me neither." Arg's hands hovered over the controls. He keyed the manual safeties off, disengaging the internal dampeners on the forward module. The console flashed a red warning. "Caution. Forced ejection will result in loss of main ship systems. Irreversible. Proceed?" Arg hesitated. Once he did this, the Widow, what was left of her, would be gone. He closed his eyes, thought of Tara. Then he hit the switch. The cockpit lights dropped to emergency status. Hydraulic couplers whined as the forward module unlocked from the ship's spine. Rayna gripped the armrest so tight her knuckles went white. Arg pulled her close, bracing for the pressure loss. "Hold on," he said. And then the charge detonated. The world turned inside out. A violent kick sent them spinning away from the Widow's hull. The pressure drop hit like a sledgehammer, slamming into Arg's chest and ear all at the same time. The emergency capsule stabilized, but barely, tumbling end over end, then leveling with a weak burst from its single latitude thrusters. Cold filled the air almost instantly. Inside the tiny module, their breath fogged thick. Rayna buried her face against Arg's shoulders, sobbing dry, terrified grasps. Arg fumbled for the emergency beacon panel. It was still wired to a backup battery. One button. He slammed it. A full-strength distress pulse launched into space, repeating, louder than anything they'd broadcast before. The bellwether would hear it. They had to. Arg clung to Rayna as the stars wheeled outside the viewport, the drifting corpse of the widow shrinking behind them. And just before they lost all power, Arg saw it. Something peeling away from the widow's hull, leaving, following, moving faster than before. Not toward them, toward the bellwether, toward rescue, toward the next target. Arg's stomach turned cold as realization settled in. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't finished. It was moving on. Chapter 21. Bellwether. The emergency capsule drifted in near silence. The only sounds left, Rayna's shallow breathing and the faint whine of the backup life support fan as it spun down. The cold crept in slow but steady. Frost coated the inside of the viewport, turning the star field into a smeared, shifting blur. Arg wrapped one arm tighter around Rayna's shoulder, feeling her trembling slow, whether from cold or exhaustion. He couldn't tell anymore. The beacon continued its loop. Low power, simple pulse train, but consistent. Arg kept his eyes fixed on the nav screen, what little of it still functioned. And there, blinking soft and steady, a signature. Bellwether, SRV class. ETA, 42 minutes. They were going to make it, if the thing didn't reach the bellwether first. Through the cracked viewport, Arg caught intermittent flashes as the bellwether's running lights punched through the void, brighter than anything else out here. Big ship, twice the widow's length, proper shielding, a real crew, rescue. But it was still coming in fast, unaware. Arg fumbled with the capsule's outdated short-range transmitter. Static answered back. The capsule's power reserves were dust. The emergency beacon was the only thing still burning. Rayna stirred against him, voice weak. Are they close? Arg didn't want to lie. Yeah, he said. Almost here. Another flicker on the viewport caught his eye. Movement. Not the bellwether. Something smaller. Closer. Trailing behind her like a shadow. The thing. Still following. But now, diverting. Closing the distance on the bellwether's forward approach vector. It was adapting. Predicting. Hunting. Arg's throat tightened. He watched as the bellwether's exterior floodlights powered on, casting sweeping beams across the drift path. The ship began a slow roll, adjusting its heading for retrieval. She was slowly getting ready to deploy the docking cradle, and bringing herself directly into the thing's path. Arg's breath frosted at the edge of his lips. Don't stop, he whispered. His knuckles whitened against the edge of the console. Don't stop. Don't open your bay doors. Just keep moving. But the bellwether signal pinged again. A clear, automated reply to their beacon. Lifeboat capsule located. Approach vector established. Docking arms deploying. Too late. Too close. Out the viewport, Arg saw it happen in real time. The bellwether's cargo retrieval bay began to open. Bay doors yawning wide. And from the dark, silent, fast, almost grateful, this thing surged forward. No propulsion, no heat signature. Just relentless motion. Like a spider crawling across open air. Straight for the gap in the bellwether's hull. Arg's chest tightened. No, he whispered, but it was already inside. The bellwether's lights flickered, then steadied. Then the docking clamps latched onto their capsule with a metallic crunch. Arg barely had time to grab Rayna before the retrieval winch started pulling them towards the ship. The stars shifted. The Widow fell away behind them, and the bellwether's massive hull filled their entire view. The airlock doors began to cycle. Arg's last conscious thought as the cold finally dragged him under was simple. We made it out. But so did it. Chapter 22. Containment. Warmth hit him like a punch. Arg gasped as oxygen flooded his lungs, coughing hard, the air wet and heavy after so long breathing the Widow's thin, metallic mix. Voices surrounded him. Too many. Too loud. Fluorescent lights stabbed at his eyes. Hands grabbed at his arms and chest. Medical techs in bright blue jumpsuits, shouting readings he couldn't track. BP crashing. Get an ampule ready. Core temp 32 and falling. Neurological baseline is non-responsive. What's with these surface lacerations on his neck? These aren't decompression injuries. Arg opened his mouth to speak, but only managed a rasping wheeze. Rayna. Where was Rayna? He twisted weakly, struggling against the blankets and med straps. Stop. Hold him, one of the techs shouted. Where? Rayna, Arg croaked. She's here, someone said close to his ear, calming but firm. She's stable. We've got her. The med-bay ceiling spun above him. The bright white panels streaked like light through water. Before the blackout took him again, Arg caught one last fractured image. Rayna strapped to the next gurney over, IV lines snaking from her arms, her face pale, but breathing, and a figure standing at the back of the room, watching, tall, unmoving, too still to be a human. Arg's eyes fluttered shut. Darkness swallowed him whole. He woke 4 hours later, this time clearer, sore, every muscle aching like he'd been through a pressure grinder, but alive. The bellwether's medbay hummed with quiet system noise, IV pumps, air scrubbers, low comm chatter from the nurse station. Rayna sat on the floor beside his bunk, back to the wall, knees pulled up. Her skin was still pale, her hair tangled, but she looked better, breathing steadily, eyes clearer. You scared the hell out of me, she said without looking at him. Not my best moment, Arg managed. They sat in silence for a beat. Arg finally pushed himself upright. How long? 4 hours since they pulled us in. Rayna's voice was low, almost detached. Med team says we're stable. They're taking us to Ceres for full decompression and neurological checks. Said we were hypoxic for too long. Arg rubbed his hands over his face, willing the fog out of his brain. And the crew? Rayna's eyes flickered toward the medbay door. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That's the part nobody's talking about. Arg froze. She continued, barely audible now. They're missing someone. He blinked. What? One of their engineering techs, guy named Wilkes, was on duty in the cargo bay when we came in. They can't find him. Arg felt the cold return to his gut. What do you mean, can't find him? Rayna shook her head. Gone. Not in his quarters, not on any deck, no sensor trace. Maybe he EVA'd? Without a suit? Without triggering any logs? She shook her head again, tighter this time. No chance. Arg swung his legs off the bunk, heart pounding. He glanced at the environmental monitors lining the medbay wall. There it was. A faint fluctuation. Atmospheric displacement. Too small for the auto alarms to catch. Too subtle. But there. Inside the ship. Arg stood slowly. ignoring the protests in his muscles. "We need to talk to the Bellwether's captain," he said. Rayna stood with him. "We need to tell them," she whispered, "before it's too late." Arg's eyes drifted toward the medbay door. The corridor beyond stretched long and empty. Too quiet. Too still. And somewhere deep in the ship, something else was awake. Chapter 23. False Security. The Bellwether's command deck smelled like recycled air and overconfidence. Arg and Rayna stood just inside the briefing room, both still wearing gray ship-issued sweats from the medbay, looking more like refugees than survivors. Their faces were drawn, pale, still hollowed out by cold and exhaustion. Across the room, Captain Rhea Mahler sat at the head of the operations table, mid-40s, lean and severe, with graying hair pulled tight at the back of her neck. Her uniform was crisp. Her tone wasn't. "We picked you up. You're alive. That's the good news." Mahler's voice was cool but impatient. "The bad news is you're scaring the hell out of my crew with ghost stories." Arg felt the muscles in his jaws tighten. "This isn't a ghost story, Captain." Mahler glanced down at the data pad in front of her, scrolling through the recovery logs. "I've reviewed your distress transmissions, atmospheric breaches, hull failure, unidentified mass displacement, electrical anomalies. I've heard every kind of panic report from the belt, usually right before a ship's systems eat themselves." "It wasn't a malfunction," Rayna said, her voice sharp, cutting through the room. "We both saw it." Mahler raised a skeptical eyebrow. "You saw what exactly?" Arg leaned forward over the table, palms flat. "Something boarded my ship, killed most of my internal systems, forced us to eject the forward module just to survive, and now one of your crew is missing, right after we docked." Silence hung in the room. Maylor's XO, a stocky man named Kelman, shifted awkwardly near the door, but said nothing. Finally, Mahler let out a long breath. "Engineering thinks that your ship was suffering from cascade structural failure from prolonged radiation exposure," she said. "Your core shielding was non-functional for months. You're both showing neurological stress markers consistent with hypoxia and hallucination." "That's convenient," Arg muttered. Mahler's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "I said it's convenient," Arg repeated louder now. "Write it off as hallucinations, ignore the sensor logs, ignore the missing man. Easier than admitting something got on board your ship." Kelman finally spoke, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, we've already swept the cargo bay twice. No heat signatures, no life signs, nothing on the internal scanners." Arg's mouth twisted into something bitter. "Yeah? Check for anything that doesn't show heat, that doesn't breathe, that doesn't register like us?" Maylor stood, hands flat on the table now. "I'm not ordering my crew into a panic search over some belt miner's trauma dreams." Arg stared at her, then said quiet but hard, "You should." By the time Mahler dismissed them, Rayna's hands were trembling again. Back in the corridor, Arg pulled her aside. "We're on our own," he said flatly. She nodded. "What do we do?" Arg's mind was already working through the ship's layout, cargo decks, maintenance access points, vent systems, old salvage instincts kicking in. He'd spent years knowing how ships failed, where they cracked, where things hid. "We find Wilkes," Arg said, "or what's left of him." He turned toward the lower decks. "We start there." Rayna swallowed hard, then followed. Behind him, as the briefing room door slid shut, Captain Mahler rubbed her temples and keyed a call to engineering. "Lock down deck access," she ordered, "and keep these two out of restricted sections." She paused, looking again at the missing crew report blinking on her console. For a split second, just long enough to register, one of her cabin temperature readings flashed a 2-degree drop in a sealed room. No airlock cycle, no explanation. Then it normalized. Maylor blinked, frowned, and dismissed the alert. Chapter 24. Below Decks. The Bellwether's lower decks felt wrong the moment Arg stepped off the ladder. The air was colder here. Too cold for an internal section still under pressure. Rayna climbed down behind him, her boots slipping slightly on the frost-slick rungs. Her breath hung in a thin mist around her face as she pulled her collar tighter. They'd slipped away from the med bay during a shift change, moving fast, keeping low. So far, none of the crew had noticed. Or maybe no one cared. Arg's hand hovered near the utility cutter strapped to his belt, a borrowed piece of equipment from a maintenance locker near Section C. Not much against whatever this thing was, but better than nothing. The corridor lighting here was dimmer. Half the strips flickered at odd intervals, like the ship's systems weren't sure if they were supposed to stay on. Then there were the marks. Arg froze halfway down the hall. "Look!" Rayna moved aside and sucked in a sharp breath. Gouges along the wall plating. Long, thin, scoring patterns, each one almost surgical, like something with bladed limbs had dragged itself along the surface. Fresh. The insulation foam behind the outer panel still oozed like a wound. "This wasn't here when they picked us up," Arg said. Rayna knelt, running her fingers close to the edge of one gouge without touching it. What the hell could do that? Arg didn't answer. He just kept moving. They found Wilkes' ID badge near the portside equipment locker, just laying there, splattered with something dark. Arg crouched, turned it over with the tip of his boot. Blood, or something like that. He opened the locker. Inside, Wilkes' tool belt, one glove, a torn piece of fabric from the standard Bellwether crew coverall. Rayna's hand went to her mouth. "Arg?" Further back, half hidden behind a crate of emergency rations, was a discarded maintenance tablet. Arg pulled it free. The screen was cracked but still flickering. Battery low, but functional enough to play back the last recorded video file. Rayna leaned close as Arg tapped the screen. Static first, then a shaky, low-light video feed. Wilkes' face, wild-eyed, half-lit by a headlamp. Breathing heavy. He was crouched inside the very locker they were standing near now. The recording was time-stamped only 3 hours earlier. Wilkes whispered into the mic. "If you're seeing this, don't come down here. I thought I was in the bay, but it's moving through the vents. It's not making noise now. Just scraping. Metal on metal. I sealed the aft compartment, but I don't think that'll hold." A sudden thud on the recording makes Wilkes jerk the camera around. For a split second, the feed showed the storage bay bulkhead. Something moved across the flame. Fast. Blurred. Then the screen cut out. The playback ended. Rayna let out a shaky breath, her eyes wide with horror. Arg stood, already scanning the corridor behind them. No movement. Not yet. But the pressure in the air. That weight. It was building. "Come on," Arg said, pocketing the tablet. "We need to find the environmental controls if it's using the vents." Rayna nodded, swallowing hard. "We have to cut off every access point. And fast," Arg added. A distant metallic clang echoed somewhere aft. Then silence. Too much silence. They moved. Fast. The end of Part 2.